Unleash their modern Blitzkrieg. Airstrikes go into Baghdad. Apache helicopters cross the Kuwait-Iraq border to destroy Iraqi observation posts. Then artillery systems open up. By daybreak, the lead units of Frank's Blitzkrieg Battleplan have crossed the Iraqi border and begun their race for Baghdad. The tanks of 3rd Infantry head northwest of the Euphrates. One brigade swings north to seize a crossing over the Euphrates west of Nasiriyah, the first potential choke point. The other two race north along dirt tracks and through the desert towards Samawa and Najaf, aiming for the Karbala Gap, the final choke point before Baghdad. The 1st Marine Division starts by striking north alongside the British 7th Armored Brigade towards the vital oil fields at Ramallah. These are swiftly captured, with only 7 out of 1,000 sabotaged. The Iraqi 51st Division collapses and surrenders. As anticipated, the breakthrough phase of the coalition Blitzkrieg battle plan is an immediate success. The few Iraqi forces anywhere near the border are swiftly brushed aside or disappear. The Marines then turn north towards the crossing point west of Nasiriyah, while the British continue on to capture Basra. Within the first few hours, the coalition forces have achieved what the Germans needed 3 days to accomplish: a breakthrough with wide open spaces ahead of them towards their main goal. For both armies, the next phase of the Blitzkrieg battle plan, strike deep, is crucial. It's now that they will be at their most vulnerable. France, May 1940. The Allied commanders seem utterly unable to understand what is happening to them. But they're not the only ones taken by surprise.
The Germans are also surprised by the initial success of their Blitzkrieg battle plan. But rather than either sitting on their laurels or trying to figure out what was going on, they simply pushed forward. They had this bias for action, this desire to push forward whenever they could. And so they decided to finish the job and then at leisure figure out what had gone wrong and what had gone right.
Once they were across the Meuse, the German panzer commanders, like Heinz Guderian, allowed nothing to stop them, not even Hitler. Within 8 more days, they had reached the coast of the English Channel, having traveled over 200 miles. With the panzers of Army Group A rampaging behind them, and German Army Group B pushing from the north, the Allies fall back, caught by a pincer movement, to Dunkirk. But the deep strike phase was not totally straightforward.
The Germans had trained a wild animal that they eventually let off the leash through the Ardennes in the spring of 1940. The difficulty was that the owner therefore lost control as soon as they let that dog off the leash. If you actually have a commander that is going to be bold, courageous and exploit opportunities, one day he's going to scare that owner, he's going to scare his headquarters.
So what did scare the owner? The first danger in the Blitzkrieg battle plan is that of counterattack. The longer and thinner the German line of advance became, the greater the exposure to counterattack, especially on weak flanks. In their drive west, the panzers came under 2 counterattacks, which might have changed the course of the battle. 3 days after the breakout from the Meuse bridgeheads, a French armored division attacked the dangerously exposed south flank. The attack was not properly supported and soon ground to a halt. But it so frightened Hitler and the German High Command that the panzer thrust was ordered to stop and wait for the infantry. The panzers did not stop.
Heinz Guderian wanted to move as quickly as possible, snapping at the backside of the retreating French and retreating British. Hitler, the owner back at headquarters, wanted to haul him back in, was calling him, was whistling for him, but he wasn't listening.
Then, 2 days later, near Arras, a British tank brigade tried to cut through the right flank. For a short time, it looked as if the right flank panzer division might be halted. But German artillery was rushed up, and this threw the British tanks back. The Germans raced on. March 24th, 2003, 3 days into the strike-deep phase of the U.S. Blitzkrieg Battleplan, and Operation Iraqi Freedom is on target. The regular Iraqi army has been brushed aside and effectively disappears. The bridgehead west of Nasiriyah is seized. The 1st Marine Division has now arrived and is crossing, while the tanks of the 3rd Infantry have advanced more than 250 miles and isolated both Samawa and Najaf. Behind them, a convoy of 2,700 resupply vehicles, escorted by Apache helicopters of the 101st Airborne, has advanced almost 200 miles and established a FARP, a forward area refueling position for 3rd Infantry. And troops are leapfrogging by helicopter to establish FARPs even further on.
As you know, our forces have been moving rapidly. We've intentionally bypassed enemy formations to include paramilitary and the Fedayeen.
But Tommy Franks has put his finger on the fact that his deep-striking forces are just as vulnerable as the Germans were in 1940. March 24th, 2003. At Nasiriyah, already identified as a choke point, the Marines move in to seize more bridges in the town. They intend to roll around potential strongpoints. But the lead units take a wrong turn and become involved in confused fighting with the Fedayeen and Ba'ath Party fanatics. The Marines are forced to go down what they term Ambush Alley and lose several vehicles. Eventually, the bridges are seized for the Marines to cross. But it takes the follow-up troops of Task Force Tarawa more than a week to secure the town so that supply columns can use the bridges unhindered.
I don't think anyone came into here thinking it was going to be a cakewalk. We knew that there were cells like the Republican Guard. We just didn't know when we'd run into them.
Elsewhere on the long road to Baghdad, Operation Iraqi Freedom could not avoid the other inherent problem of lightning war: logistics. The coalition supply columns snake north in seemingly unending lines. The attack units in front of them are armored. The supply vehicles are soft-skinned, therefore vulnerable.
The Iraqis could have exploited this by using what might be called the savage rabbit defense. If the Iraqi forces had waited for the coalition forces to bypass them and then emerge from their holes, as it were, to attack the supply units, the maintenance units, the logistics units, then they could have inflicted quite a bit of damage and forced the coalition forces to stop, maybe even turn around.
The Fedayeen and other paramilitaries do launch sporadic attacks on the supply columns, but it is never a consistent plan.
Certainly there have been some harassing attacks on our supply lines, and they continue. But they have not stopped the movement of our logistics support forward to each of our fielded forces. We continue to provide self-protection to those. What we note is those attacks have become fewer with fewer forces, and they have all been defeated with relatively minimal cost to our forces.
But in the fog of war, with troops exhausted, accidents happen. Near Nasiriyah, one resupply unit becomes lost and ends up in a firefight, with some of its members killed and others captured, including Private Jessica Lynch. The logistics problem also caught up with the German battle plan in World War II. On May 25th, 2 weeks after the launch of their Blitzkrieg, they had the British and French armies trapped at Dunkirk. The tanks might have swept on and taken the trapped men, but they stopped, and over 350,000 British and French troops were able to escape from the beaches.
Interestingly, historically, it seems to be that around the 250-mile mark, armies tend to run out of steam. If you measure the distance from the start point of the German attack through the Ardennes, through the route that they took to the Dunkirk perimeter, it works out at very roughly 250 miles.
The German advance was so fast that it outran its backup. This was largely because, despite propaganda film of tanks and trucks, more than 90% of the German army was still reliant on its foot soldiers and horses. Over 60 years later, on March 25th, the US commanders, like their German counterparts, decide that a halt must be made to regroup before completing their campaign with the assault on Baghdad. As they do so, another sort of fog of war strikes their advance, the Shamal, blinding sandstorms. France's 3rd Division halts. The lighter armored Marines stop their advance, so as not to get too far ahead. The decision is misinterpreted by many journalists. The media assumes that the advance has stalled and that the American military face another Vietnam. In fact, the Americans are resting and, more importantly, resupplying.
To the uninitiated, some of the things that happened during Iraqi freedom looked as though Blitzkrieg was failing, but to those that understood the history of Blitzkrieg, these were common problems that the Americans were trying to overcome.
Then, on April 2nd, the race to Baghdad is unleashed again. West of the Euphrates, Apache gunships of the 101st Airborne attacked the Iraqi Republican Guard Medina Division near Karbala. U.S. Rangers seized the Hadathan Dam on the outskirts of Karbala to stop the Iraqis blowing it and flooding the area. U.S. 3rd Infantry pushes around the city, seizes the main bridge on the road to Baghdad, and begins to probe towards the capital. East of the Euphrates, one Marine column reaches Diwaniyah, but instead of continuing direct towards Baghdad, swings northeast to cross the Tigris west of Kut. This bypasses the city, which the Iraqis had been preparing to defend. The Marines then head for Baghdad. On April 3rd, an armored company from 3rd Infantry Division reaches and takes Baghdad Airport. The expected resistance does not take place. But the interlude is deceptive, the result of the speed of the American advance. Not expecting the enemy so quickly, the defenders have gone underground to sleep. When they wake up, a fierce counterattack takes place, and fighting for the airport rages for more than 24 hours. The Marines approaching from the east also encounter more determined resistance. But by April 6th, they too are pushing into the city. It takes 2 more days for U.S. forces to close off Baghdad completely. Then, a Marine engineer team helps excited Iraqi civilians pull down the statue of Saddam Hussein in Firdos Square. But the capture of Baghdad Airport had effectively marked the end of the battle plan for Blitzkrieg in Iraq, just as the halt at Dunkirk had marked the end of the German Blitzkrieg in northern France. Both armies, over 60 years apart, had shown how Blitzkrieg could be a triumphant success. But if one looks at how they each stacked up, both against the requirements of the Blitzkrieg battle plan and its weaknesses, there are interesting similarities and contrasts. Both commanders deceived the enemy and controlled the air. In the breakthrough and strike deep phases of the battle plan, the relative technological balance between each side and its enemy played a crucial role. Except in the air, the Germans had no particular advantage in numbers or equipment. They achieved overwhelming force where it was needed by grouping their panzer divisions together and then using them ruthlessly. In contrast, the Americans used the enormous technological superiority of their weapons and communications to overwhelm an enemy which theoretically